I'm Jeff Wright, and welcome to the Blame to Fame podcast. As an entrepreneur, I have not only built an extremely successful business from scratch, but also employed thousands of men and women and helped them on their path to financial freedom. One of the most common themes for me and everyone else who has succeeded is that we never blame anyone and are aware that our success or failures fall solely on our shoulders. It was not until I hit rock bottom that I realized that only I alone could change my future. And on my podcast, you're going to hear the stories of successful folks who have gone from blame to fame in their own lives. I look forward to sharing my journey and great guests that will educate you about their path to success. Please join me each week on the Blame to Fame podcast. All right, I've got a real treat today. He's published all over the place. He's got a book titled Do Good to Lead Well, has another book coming out soon called A Time to Lead. He's a speaker, coach, consultant, and psychologist. Welcome, Dr. Craig Dowden. Craig, thanks for being on, man.
Jeff, pleasure's mine. Really looking forward to the conversation.
So that's an interesting title, A Time to Lead. It sounds like in the world today, that's something we really need is leadership, something that's sorely lacking all over the place. How did you come to title that?
Yeah, it's a great observation that you're making, and certainly you've you really tapped into it right off the bat. That was during COVID, especially during the initial phases of COVID, and then as the world essentially shut down, grind to a halt, and thinking about, okay, as we navigate through this just unprecedented period, never in our history, our lifetimes, have we encountered something like this. So what is necessary? What do we need to do? How can we pivot? How can we create a more positive future? And so it really got me focused and interested around the idea that great leadership starts with great self-leadership. And then what does that look like? And what does that mean to us? And so then that was really the foundational architecture of the book.
Well, I've always said that because I work and live in a sales culture, but sales is leadership also. I lead a big group of insurance agents, and I help coach a lot of other sales groups and whatnot. But I believe that you're right. You can't lead by saying. You have to lead by example, and you have to lead by your own self-belief. And quite honestly, what I find is a lot of times a salesperson will come to me and they'll be complaining about no one will have confidence in them, no one will trust them. And I can tell right off the bat, they have no trust and confidence in themselves. So I think that's where it has to start.
You're absolutely right, Jeff. And it is such a critical piece. And I love that you made the linkage as well in terms of, well, in any role that we are, sales, that's about leadership. We're all the CEOs of our own lives. And so we make critical decisions every single day. And the person we start with leading is ourselves. And so being aware of that, and I think your point as well, and this is such an important insight around, well, it's how do we go about mastering our mindset and our emotions, our resiliency, and all those pieces. And so the more we look inward around how we tap into our talents and our insights and our expertise and our experience, that's critical. So let's take the lead around influencing our environment. And I love that you link it, and it is. And we're all in sales, some just in
everyone
different capacities of that, right? And so you're absolutely right that this is vital.
Yeah, someone told me one time, no, I'm not in sales. I said, trust me, if you get in a car accident and you go to the hospital and you're screaming in pain, wanting morphine, you're selling.
Yes,
you're absolutely selling.
Exactly. And it's every conversation that we have really, and I love it. And it reminds me of Dan Pink's exceptional book, right? To Sell is Human, which is around the idea that, well, basically when we're selling, it's all around influence. And so back to leadership. And I love you make that linkage, Jeff, that those two things go hand in hand. So leadership is fundamentally about influence. What we're trying to do is to influence, motivate a collective to achieve a desirable goal. And that goal can come from within, it can come from without, yet the fundamental premise is it's all about influence.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. I saw a video clip the other day of Nick Saban, who is the coach of the University of Alabama, and he was talking about in an organization, it's important that you build your team correctly, because if you have a group of overachievers, they want nothing to do with the mediocre. And the mediocre want nothing to do with the overachievers. So if you can't balance that and pick your teams well, you're never even going to have a team. And I think that's so true.
It's brilliant, and you're so right, and you have to be very mindful about the construction, and once again having clarity within self is vital to that. And then also, and I love the point that you're making, right? Okay, so when you start to blend together high potentials with, let's say, quote unquote average performers, people who are good and not great, if you will. So now it's going to be about, well, how do we influence them? How do we lead them? What are the elements that may trigger within us in terms of how we potentially bring those component parts together? And so this is just a constant journey of discovery and evaluation. And it's so important to not only our individual success, to our collective success as well.
So maybe you could help me out with something. So when I have my Zoom calls with groups of agents that we work with, I literally have to pick and choose who's in these groups, because I do have a group of overachievers. And if I have one underachiever in there or someone who's mediocre, they get pissed off thinking that these guys are bragging or they're it makes them feel badly and whatnot. And then the guys who do well get on my case for bringing a crier and a whiner in there, or at least what they perceive that crier or whiner to be. And it's really a pain to have to kind of segregate these people out, but it's really the only way I could figure out how to do it. So if you have any better suggestions than that for me, I would love to hear them.
Well, and I love the point, right? I think this is really powerful, and what I find is interesting. And so my background is in psychology, PhD in psychology, specialization in business. And why I did that is I was really excited to understand the science behind it. So there's so much evidence that suggests that diversity drives countless benefits on so many: performance, collaboration, innovation, you name it. It's market share, profitability. There's just endless studies that reference that. And then the trick is, okay, so how do we bring these groups together? Because what's interesting sometimes is that what you find is that, well, it is that diversity that leads to potential conflict, which makes people feel less effective. Yet again, collectively we achieve more. So for me, what I'd be really interested in is both in terms of the individual who's coming in, who's, let's say, on the moderate level, is to talk about the type of culture they're going to join, provide. And so this is really interesting with some of the work that I do with my clients, is that, hey, this is a really high growth, high performing, just A+ player personalities. And so this is the type of culture that you're going to see, it's going to be a part of. How do you feel about that? And what are your thoughts? What excites you about it? What concerns you about it? And then vice versa with the A players, if you will, those top performers, talking about, well, hey, how bringing other people in with a different vantage point can enrich our thinking, because that's one of the findings from the research as well, is we can be relatively myopic in our own success and have the same type of mindset and miss opportunities that could be out there. And then on top of that, the potential benefits by bringing someone in, the expression rising tides lift all boats. So now we can collectively capitalize on that together. So there's some really interesting, I'd love to observe and have follow-up conversations.
I'll have you on one of them if you like.
I love it. Yeah, it sounds like a fascinating interplay. And I think that's, at the end of the day, for us as human beings, it's really around, okay, setting expectations and understanding who we are, what we're about, what we want to achieve, and why. And once we're really clear on the ground rules around that, that's when you can accomplish extraordinary things. And so and sometimes people's expectations about why they're joining something or why they're doing something, they can be quite misaligned. So I think there's just such opportunity for really constructive dialogue.
Well, what I had to do when we started doing this on a big scale in early 2020, had never really done them before. And I had to lay some really hard ground rules down about them. And one of the rules was, there was to be no bitching and complaining on the call, because if I have 50 people on there, it only takes one to poison the whole call, only one. So we made the rule, if you have a complaint, if you want to complain about anything, or if you have any negative concerns, come to us individually, because we wanted these coaching calls to build people up, to be positive, to give them all a safe haven to talk about their problems without fear of judgment, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of people, I think that's what holds a lot of people back, because it all goes back to when you were in school.
Yes.
And you're terrified that the teacher is going to call on you to ask you something. And a lot of people say, hey, don't speak up, you'll get embarrassed and whatnot. And a lot of people learn that early on as children. And now they're afraid to bring up anything, from fear of judgment and whatnot. So we had to take drastic measures to eliminate that. And by drastic, I mean, when we had someone negative or picking on someone, they lost their job instantly. It only took 4 or 5 times of us doing that, making examples out of them, that really solved the problem. May not be the best way, but it worked.
Well, and I love what you're sharing. It's such a brilliant point. And this is something that I find in my coaching work and speaking work and consulting work with organizations throughout, is it's such a missed opportunity. And I love that you said we put in solid ground rules. Behavioral expectations is what I'm hearing you say, Jeff, which is so critical. Because then if we don't do that, and you can see, well, then everyone comes up with their own scorecard, their own ground rules, and it's chaos. And what I love that what you're talking about, not only that you identify those behavioral expectations, because now when we join a group, it's abundantly clear what's expected of us. And then the other piece, which so many organizations, even if they do that step, which so many don't, then there isn't the accountability on the back end.
Yeah.
And so as you say, hey, look, if this happens, if X, then Y. And we're not, this isn't just feel good. This is absolutely sacred in order for us to accomplish extraordinary things. And your point as well, there's so much great stuff in there, right, around that psychological safety. Because once again, just as there's incredible research around diversity, there's equal research around the power of psychological safety. And unless I feel comfortable sharing my ideas and perspectives without fear of personal reprisal, we're not going to accomplish what we could as a team. So love that example, and not surprised that you had such amazing results because of it.
Well, because we wanted them to be able to do it without fear. We wanted to create a safe zone for them to talk about it, because a lot of people are probably having the same problems. They're just too afraid to speak up about them. And as far as the ground rules go, and in terms of that and the consequences of breaking those ground rules, if you don't execute on those immediately, they're worthless. It's back in the day. If my dad was a rough, tough guy. So if he told me he was going to beat the hell out of me when I was a kid, if I did something, he meant it. And I knew that he meant it.
Well, and it's such an important point. I had the profound privilege of collaborating with Alan Mulally. So he's the former legendary CEO of Ford Motor Company and Boeing Commercial Airplanes. And in our conversations, he shared, and it fits beautifully with what you're talking about, Jeff. He said, never a joke at someone else's expense. No. People go along to get along. And yet the damage that that causes, not just in the moment, into the future, is profound. It's unmeasurable. And because of the very thing that you're saying, because now I'm going to hold back, and you're so right to link it to growing up in school and, oh, well, someone's going to call on me or make fun of me. And now what am I going to do? I'm going to sit back. I'm going to be hesitant. I'm not going to ask the quote unquote stupid question, which rarely in my experience it's the one that's most in need of asking. Yet
Yes.
people are reluctant. And I love the point you make as well. This is such awesome insight, right? Which is, well, chances are other people around the table, if not everyone, is struggling. And it's all around, well, who's going to do the trust fall first? And we need to create those conditions in place so someone can say, hey, you know what, over here, this client has been challenging, or me trying to connect with this stakeholder, I've run into some roadblocks. Any ideas around? And chances are everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm trying to do this with ABC Corp. And it's just not, I'm stuck too.
Now that's pretty impressive. CEO of Ford, Boeing. How big of an influence was he on your new upcoming book?
Well, it was such a, and you opened with this, which I think is really cool. I love the parallel philosophies and experience on this, Jeff, whereby, so when I had the really incredible good fortune to connect with Alan early on, one of the things that we really connected on was the idea around leadership is not only who you need to be, it's also about what you need to do. So it's taken both, and sometimes there's an emphasis or the focus is on either of those versus the integration. And one of the ideas that I had was that, well, within the book, because if you go out there and back to sales, so I love this, right? When you're looking to influence organizations and say, it's important to pay attention to positive leadership and self-leadership because that has impacts, then invariably sometimes people would say, well, yeah, that's nice. And that only works with small caps or startups or mid-size, or, when you get into these global multinationals, or you're on the, the stock exchange or the Fortune 500, forget about it. This isn't real life. So I had this idea. I was like, I'd love to have master classes from CEOs who could comment on how important these qualities were. And when I met Alan and I said, hey, I'd love to have you teach CEO masterclasses.
That's
Because you've had
impressive.
like
That's
his
impressive.
career in Boeing and Ford has been extraordinary. And when he took over Ford, the stock price was about $1.01. And when he left, it was 1837. So he
Wow.
engineered one of the most remarkable, he was CEO of the year, one of Time's top people of the year. Like he's one of the most respected, if not the top respected CEO of all time. And so to have that chance to collaborate and then have a master class where he could say, hey, mastering our emotions was critical to what we did within his working together management system at Ford and Boeing, creating that psychological safety, Jeff, that you talked about, getting people to raise their hands when things weren't going well, and rather than be humiliated or face repercussions, they were actually elevated and said, hey, thanks for a quote that he shared with me. When people would share their toughest challenges, he would literally applaud them in the massive executive boardroom and say, thank you, Jeff, for exhibiting such extraordinarily strong and transparent leadership. Like, think about that, right?
Love that.
Yeah. So I would say his fingerprints are all over the book for sure.
Mastering emotions, that's so important, because I can tell you from my own life, every bad, stupid decision I've ever made in my life has come from emotion. They all have. When all you have to do is just kind of back up a little bit. Now, I have another question for you, because you work so much in the corporate world. Now, I've never worked in the corporate world. I work with the corporate world because I represent so many insurance companies. I've sat in a lot of boardrooms. And the one thing that I find that would drive me insane, I would be a terrible employee. That's why I've never received a W-2 paycheck in my life. I never have. And I hope I never do. I would be the worst, because me doing business with these companies, I know where the top leadership is. Okay. And a lot of them think a lot of the same way I do and the way you and I are talking about. But it's the middle management people that I see the most. And to be honest with you, a lot of these people run their lives and their departments almost like with the same drama that would be in a middle school. And every time we would go, or every time now that I go to a company and I'm meeting with all these department heads and whatnot, it's funny because I can really just fly up to meet one person, and I'll be in a room full of 15 people. And it's so funny because most of them are patting themselves on the back, or it's their need, at least from what I observe, it's their need to feel relevant one way or another, a need for their job to be justified. Yeah. And my question is, if this makes sense to you, is how do you build a culture to where none of that is necessary?
Yeah, it's such an important point, and I appreciate the highlighted on the middle management side, because, and this is what's fascinating for me as well. Like, I have a high degree of empathy also on the middle managers, because here's what's really interesting: on the front line, people are executing on, hey, go out, Jeff, do this, or Craig, go out and do these things. And then at the the side of the house, then it's lots of autonomy, lots of influence, can pull the levers. And then you end up having middle management whereby, okay, you have your directs coming through, and then you also have, and it comes back to one of the points, and I'm so glad that you talked about it, guidelines and expectations. And I think a lot of times people struggle whereby, okay, are my contributions relevant? Are my contributions being seen? Yeah. Are my contributions valued? And this is where having an open, honest dialogue within the organization is so mission critical. So people can start to talk about, all right, Craig, this is where you add the most value. This is what we need to see from you. Because again, what I find in the research as well, which is so instructive, sometimes middle managers either observe challenging behaviors at the top end of the house, and they make the assumption, well, that's how I need to get there. Or there's no communication around what's expected, and they just kind of make an assumption around what they need to do to get there. And so I think, coming back to the crux of your question, which is so important, is that, and I remember reading an amazing study where they said the ethical or moral compass, the integrity, if you will, of an organization starts at the very top. And then as you increasingly go down by level, it dilutes. It just nets. On average, that's what happens. And so I think when you get the really senior leadership team together in alignment and map out, as you talked about before, which again, I'm so thrilled you mentioned it, Jeff, is that, so what are our expectations of each other? What kind of culture are we creating here? What behaviors are and are not acceptable? Now, what that does is really reduce or even eliminate, ideally, the noise where people are trying to figure out how to be relevant, how to make their contributions matter. And now they're rowing in the same direction.
I think a lot of this could boil down, and you may disagree with me on this, but I have seen so many cultures working with so many companies and whatnot, that whoever is on top is so feared or whatever, that people will just blatantly lie to them and not tell them the truth. And the big problem with that, if they're getting unreliable information and that's what they're making their decisions on, it's a problem. Now, my wife is from Russia, and she'll talk about Vladimir Putin a lot. And she says, everybody that works with him is scared shitless of him because, he'll have him killed or whatever. So they're only going to tell him what he wants to hear. Yeah. And so someone like that is making a lot of bad moves based on a lot of bad information. and none of that goes well for anybody.
Well, I want to hit the 1,000% agree button. I'll do, yeah, however I can amp that to the max. You're bang on, and you raise so many important points in terms of, because as you go further up the organizational ladder, it's increasingly difficult to get the honest truth, right? Because people are trying to figure out, what does Craig want to hear? What does he need to hear? What do we think he wants to hear? Like, is he going to want to know things are struggling on and on and on? So we invariably sugarcoat. And to your point, and that's what, there's so many things, right? Number one, when we're in a fear-based environment, a fear-based culture, just look at the social science. When we are in fear mode, our decision-making is horrific. It's really the worst possible state to be in to make a decision. You talked about being emotionally hijacked earlier. Absolutely. When we're in fear, it's all around being protective. It's all around minimizing risk. And evidence shows we don't capitalize on opportunities, and we tend to make poor quality decisions when we're challenged. And then on top of that, you've got the poor quality information. So not only are we already leaning towards making bad decisions, even if we're able to, quote unquote, make a good one, we're in a state to make the best decision we can. The data we're using is polluted. It's not accurate. And so now even if we make a good faith decision, a balanced decision, the inputs aren't valid. So now it's terrible. So and as you rightly point out, it's for all of us. So it might feel good, it's like, oh, good, look at everybody nodding their heads and agreeing with me and say, look, see, we're all in alignment. That can be a warning signal. If we don't have dissent, that's challenging. If you can't recall a meeting that someone raised their hand and said, hey, have we thought about X, or what about Y? I would be really, mindful of how safe my culture is. Am I getting the best quality information shared with us?
One of my dearest friends is retired now, but he was the president of an insurance company. Mm-hmm. And he would tell me all the politics and whatnot that went on. And I love I said, well, how do you navigate all this? He says, it's a very simple rule. I operate on the premise that 100% of the people are 100% self-serving 100% of the time. He said, if I operate on that premise, I'm never disappointed.
That's a bumper sticker. Well, and I think, and then accepting that. So where I would go with that is, accepting that, recognizing that possibility, and then say, okay, because here's the other part as well. And I think this is really important, regardless of our philosophy and orientation. And I love, your blame to fame, right? Like just that linkage. It's saying, okay, so it's important to recognize that there are people that are going to be highly self-motivated. And I've seen it where people will just, oh, well, there's no way, or I refuse to accept that there are people like that. And that sets you up for some really challenging conversations, collaborations. So then what comes, if we take that as our bumper sticker and then go, now what steps do I need to take as the leader of this team, the leader of this organization, to ensure that the risks associated with that are minimized? So what behaviors will support the empowerment of everyone to go after these valuable goals? So I think that is such an important point for all of us to think about, like, to what extent is what I'm saying or doing actually aligning with the things that I'm saying that I want to achieve?
So tell me about your podcast. You have a podcast coming out.
I do.
What's it called?
It's called Do Good to Lead Well. Thank you. And so for me, I've had the great fortune to talk with thought leaders such as yourself, Jeff, in my conversations and have a Do Good to Lead Well webinar series. And I thought, you know what, I would love to open that up to a broader community and to release those podcasts, because they were live recordings and then that was it. And so it's been really exciting to be able to share those discussions with best-selling authors and top CEOs so that people can listen in on the science and practice of positive leadership and take away some tangible tools that they can implement right away, personally and professionally.
Yeah, well, that's great because, to me, it's all about positivity. Negativity doesn't create anything positive. Absolutely nothing. Blame. One reason I call it blame to fame is that, if blame were an Olympic sport, America would win the gold medal every year.
Love that.
Because as we talked a little before we started the podcast, I don't watch the news. I do not watch it at all. I really, other than what little I hear from people, I couldn't tell you one thing that's going on in the world.
Right.
Like I said, my wife's in Russia. I mean, from Russia. She has family in Ukraine. So I do hear about that. And that's a horrible situation.
Yes.
But, outside of that, I don't really hear a whole lot. But if I were to turn on any of the news outlets, it doesn't matter. If I were to turn any of that on, it's blame instantly. Somebody's blaming someone else. If someone screws something up at a company, or if one of my people screws something up, it's instantly not taking any kind of responsibility. It's laying blame. And I have to tell you, I tell people this all the time. If someone screws up and they take responsibility for it and let me know about it, my respect for that person goes through the roof, because no one does it anymore. No one does it.
You're yeah,
the respect that you can command just by taking personal responsibility, and so few people do it. The respect that you can get will be enormous. Yeah, absolutely enormous. But again, no one does it.
Well, and you want to me, and I love that example. And then on my side, to build on that and echo it, would be, you want to fast track them to leadership positions, because then they're going to take accountability for what's going on. Because as leaders, and it's interesting, there's so much to talk about, right? As leaders, we go, well, it's their fault, or Craig didn't do this, or Sally didn't do that, or we'll look at James over there. And it's like, at the end of the day, leading a team, the buck stops with you. Like, you are the leader. And so taking that responsibility and saying, okay, well, if Sally had a role in this, what was my role? Because it's not 100-0, even if there is some pieces. So as the leader, I have to learn from that. And I love the philosophy and the title of the blame to fame, because it reminds me beautifully of Carol Dweck's phenomenal work around mindset. Fixed mindset, growth mindset. So are we going to look at a situation, blaming it, which is basically, well, it's outside of me, or I don't have the capacity to do anything about it. So you know what? It's going to be this way tomorrow, the next day, the next week, the next month, and for the rest of my life. Or do we look at it from a growth? What can I learn from this? What are some steps that I can take? Who can I enlist to try to move around this barrier? How can I grow and develop through this experience? And it's the same situation, yet whether we have a blame mindset or a fame mindset, it entirely affects the experience of it and how well we can capitalize.
It's interesting because one of my mentor, I actually have two four-star generals that are really good friends of mine. And it's interesting because these guys are really feared, as they should be.
Just to make that point. Yeah.
But it's just the respect that these people command. And it's just by the way that they carry themselves and whatnot. But one of them was telling me one day that when just like if he goes through an office and a soldier doesn't salute correctly, he doesn't stop and chew him out for not doing it correctly. He will actually stop and show him and correct the problem.
Yep.
And that's the thing that they talk about, is especially General Eberhart would talk about, is not laying blame to anyone. It's actually fixing the problem, making sure it doesn't happen again. And saluting, that's kind of silly in my world, but really much of anything, just going through and addressing the problem instead of like, because, how many problems would be fixed more quickly if you just stopped, limit. And it's like people, I grew up in Georgia, so we have a saying, beating a dead dog.
Right.
If something happens, I can have an insurance agent call me up and something bad went happen, company screwed his case up or whatever. And he'll tell me once and I'm like, okay. And then they'll just constantly relive it. Well, none of that fixes the problem. And so many corporate cultures that are that way. Somebody will screw up and they'll make sure that they go the rest of their lives not forgetting that they screwed it up, but nobody addressed any kind of problem.
Well, I love that example, and thanks for sharing, because a lot of times we assume, well, this is a competence issue, right? Like, so they know, like, why are they doing it? Like, this is something that they're doing it wrong. Like, what's wrong with Craig? And what I love about the example you're showing is that, well, maybe they're just not aware that it's happening incorrectly. They've been off doing it for so long, and using your example, which is great. I'm saluting, and no one has brought this to my attention before. Multiple 4-star generals or someone had just got yelled at me, and I thought, oh, well, gee, this is what I think is supposed to be done. And so to your point, just having a conversation or sitting down with someone or standing next to them and saying, hey, this is what's expected. It's an incredibly eye-opening experience. And sometimes we can make the assumption that, oh, well, Craig isn't motivated, or Craig is disrespecting me, or Craig just, doesn't know how to do something. Maybe exactly. They need to be shown. They need to be taken aside and go, hey, here's what's being expected. Here's the expectation.
Yeah. And I think too, that most leaders, especially people that are leading in a sales culture. Okay. Because I can tell you that I know a lot of people that are very successful sales leaders who carry themselves a certain way in their personal lives are not that way at all.
Right. Yes.
So my takeaway from that is if you're going in a certain way, it's critical you never break character.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. No, well, and you're so right. And it comes back to being authentic, right? Because if people have a certain set of expectations around us, if people experience us in a certain way, well, that builds invaluable data points. It informs how they see us. It informs how they experience us every single day. And then this is where it's vital, as well, as if we are going to go off script, then it's essential to let people in on that, because otherwise they're going to come up with their own interpretations and their own explanations. And coming back to a point that you raised earlier, which is so important as well, they might assume it's something they're doing. So, well, now Jeff is mad at me, or, this is where. And so the more work that we can do, the more intentionality we can bring, the more awareness around our behaviors in any given moment, what we're saying and what we're doing, the better it is. Because, and back to sales, back to influence, well, we'll lose trust if we are perceived as inauthentic. We will be, it's tough to establish trust when I feel like, oh, well, Craig was this way today, and then tomorrow he showed up in a different way. Like, what's going on here? Who is Craig?
One of my favorite books, and you were talking about assumptions, one of my favorite books that I think should be required reading for every person is called The 4 Agreements. Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Don Miguel Ruiz.
Yes.
And he talks about, one of the 4 agreements is not to make assumptions.
Right.
Because when you make assumptions and whatnot, your monkey mind in here is telling you all kinds of things, and 99.99.99% of it is not true.
Yes. And it's such you're and
it's
so
just
right.
it's just like if your wife were to text you right now and just say, Craig, we need to talk, and that's it.
Right. Yeah.
Your assumptions are going to go crazy. You're going to be going, oh shit, what did I do?
Well, and you're so, and I've rarely heard of a conversation after someone says, hey, Jeff, we need to talk, that's ooh, let's excited to dive into this. This is going to be the best conversation of my life. And it's so true, because who knows, right? Like, who knows what that message is?
Exactly.
And your point around assumptions is so critical, because I also find that then our assumptions are invariably influenced, if not entirely constructed, by our own experience, our own value system.
Yes.
So even with, we talked about and COVID and the world that we're living in, and post COVID, as we turn the corner here. Well, I've seen so many conversations that were mishandled because an executive, a sales leader, a CEO made the assumption that employees in their organization were going through the same thing that they were. If they had children, they thought that people without children had it easier than people with children, or all kinds of assumptions. And even if they were good-natured, well-intentioned, those assumptions can really negatively impact our relationships with other people. And because they come from, we can categorize it as a positive assumption, if you will, assuming the best, or, hey, I didn't mean to hurt someone. We can dampen our ability to see when that message didn't land. That behavior didn't have the intended effect, because I'm blinded by my assumption. And so it's critical for us, and I think it's such a powerful idea, to look at our lives and our interactions more as scientists. And I love that you talked about that earlier when you said back up. So borrowing that, right? Back
Absolutely.
up, a little bit more of a neutral, dispassionate view of what we're saying and doing, and not being so influenced by our assumptions.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine. I talked to him one morning. He says, "Well, I'm kind of nervous. I'm getting called into the president's office today, and I don't know what he wants to talk about." And he was like really, really nervous, really scared. He was trying to backtrack what may have went wrong with sales, what may have happened with this, what may have happened with that. And turns out he was getting a bigger bonus.
Right. Yes.
He was getting a bigger bonus. But I mean, he was just gut wrenched all day, just under the assumption that something was wrong.
Right. And thankfully, and we can play with that example, right? And unfortunately, your friend went through that turmoil. Yet imagine if then they were emotionally hijacked even further, and they go in and then they make an assumption about something that's going on. And then they're like, well, I don't know what I did, but Jeff, he did this over, and start to panic. And then it's like, oh, we were going to offer you a promotion, and now, hey, this is not, you're not who we thought we were. This is really challenging. and the other piece that I think is really interesting as well, and there's such great work, Daniel Gilbert out of Harvard, and he wrote Stumbling on Happiness. And he talked about the impact of anxiety, and they've done so much fascinating work on this as well, where the vast majority of our fears, and they've tracked this through diary studies, right, where the vast majority of our fears do not come true. And in many cases, they're significantly better than what we had anticipated. Like your friend's great example. I think I'm going in to get reprimanded. Hey, I got a massive bonus. This is awesome. And I think what's really, to me, the real mic drop kind of takeaway from that research, where they say, okay, so I love the acronym of FEAR, which is false evidence appearing real. So I think that is just absolutely awesome. And then the real damage of that, what's labeled as anticipatory anxiety, is not only do we go through the anxiety pre-event, if the event turns out as terribly as we think, we go through it twice. So it's doubly draining. And then so it's really essential to say, okay, well, if so, using your friend's example, what data am I using to think that I'm about to get in trouble? What else could be happening? Right. And even bringing balance to that perspective of, well, maybe it's a promotion. Maybe I'm being given a stretch assignment. Maybe I'm going to have a bigger bonus. So just allowing us to kind of see both sides of the equation is really powerful.
Yeah, that, and another thing Ruiz said in his book, and which is 100% true. Human beings, we're the only of God's creatures that relive their mistakes over and over again.
Yes. Absolutely.
If my dog were to pee on the rug, he's forgotten about it as soon as he's finished.
That's right. Yeah.
Could care less.
That's right.
He's
Over and done with.
Well, Craig, if people want to get a hold of you, how do they do it?
Well, a couple of ways. I would say my website, craigdowden.com, has lots of articles and videos, talks that I've delivered. So you can certainly connect there and sign up for my newsletter, as well as LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, love connecting with people, and love, especially in communities like this. So let me know that Jeff sent you.
Yeah. Are you on Instagram?
I'm not on Instagram, so that's something that's part of what I'm exploring at the moment. So
Okay.
LinkedIn is the primary way.
Okay. Well, I can see that because you're dealing more with the corporate type people and whatnot.
Well, and people are using lots of different platforms now. Instagram, TikTok.
I was going to say, man, you look like a TikToker to me.
Yeah, I'm going to have some kind of viral piece that goes out, and so maybe you heard it here first. And once again, coming back to building community, building conversation, really finding the best ways to engage and rally and be a part of a broader community. So and thank you for this invitation. This has just been an awesome conversation.
Oh, I enjoyed having you on there. So folks, find Craig on LinkedIn, check out his podcast. I hope you'll have me on it one day. I'd love to be on it.
I would love to.
And and check him out. It was Craig. It was great talking to you. And I really enjoyed being you on, and I learned a lot. So thank you so much for being on.
You're welcome. Pleasure is mine. This was great. Love the questions and the energy. And your commitment to positive leadership. So thank you so much, Jeff.
You got it.